Okay, so wait, we did not. What is the name?
I don't know. It's nameless. We have a nameless podcast.
Coffee time with Jade
Oh
and
my
Robbie.
God, no. I'm not a hipster.
I'm your host, Robert. And this, as always, is the lovely Jade. Hi, Jade.
Hi.
Say hello to our guests.
Hello, guests. That's not creepy at all.
That'll be a fun intro, though. Yeah. So, hi, this is Robert, and we are feeling so awkward recording this for the first time. We're sitting here, going over notes, obsessing over trying to make it work right.
I just like watching the rhythms of my voice patterns going downward, and yours go up and down.
Mine go up and down. Mine are more balanced. No, it's more your laughs that go down. Everyone at home's going, what the heck are they talking about?
That's really weird.
Right.
It looks like an EKG.
So we should give the disclaimer that it is possible that this might not be for little ones. We're not sure what content will always come up.
Yeah, we don't plan things ahead of time, so
We're trying to plan. But,
maybe see if you have an internal babysitter that can play with your kids.
Right.
And I mean, I don't know, maybe an external one. If you have external kids, they probably shouldn't listen either, just in case.
Right. There might be some things that could confuse them and raise a lot of questions because the very nature of this topic has to do with recovery from trauma and the results thereof, right?
Yes.
Right. Okay. So this is episode 1 of the now nameless podcast.
We should let the listeners help us come up with a name.
Right. We should go
Because
on.
we're lazy and don't want to do our jobs.
Hang
You want to
on.
name our podcast?
So on this first podcast, we're going to kind of be discussing who we are and what we are. Animal, vegetable, mineral. And
Discuss what you are.
but we're just gonna kind of be discussing the basics of Robert and Jade, and what a bit of what is DID, fragmentation, and multiplicity. Right.
Right.
So let's get started here. This is so awkward. So who is Jade?
Well, that's the question everyone wants to know.
It is.
No, actually, this is awkward because I always work from this assumption that nobody gives a shit. Oh, by the way, we're probably going to cuss.
Okay, so
We have
After-
technical issues.
right after Jade cussed there, all of a sudden my little machine went nutty. So
It didn't like that. It was
Yeah.
correcting me.
So we probably will cuss because we say shit like that. So get all your cussing out.
Well, I can't just like cuss on demand.
Okay, but yeah, we probably will cuss. So another reason is to not have the kids around if your kids aren't used to hearing cuss words.
Yeah, trauma makes me feel like cussing a lot of times because, trauma.
Because trauma. Should that be our hashtag? Because trauma.
We're cussing because trauma.
Coffee. Because trauma. Chocolate. Because trauma.
I mean, I could get behind that.
It's a great justification. There you go. So, Jade often doesn't think that anyone wants to. Why would anyone want to hear? And I often spend time telling her.
Yeah, we just did that a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
Okay, so I started this blog 4 years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I'll go into the blog a little bit. I started Thoughts from J8 in 2014, and I really just started it because I was in a small group through my church at the time and just went into it really honest and blunt about where I was coming from. Was not in a good place emotionally and was looking for a community to be part of and had moved to that area. And that community had been recommended to me. So I just went in super honest and said, this is who I am, this is where I'm coming from. And they wanted to know more. They were super sweet people. They wanted to know more, but I did not want to spend, every time I got together with them, both talking about myself and trying to educate them about trauma and about, my particular situation. So I started a blog and just said, hey, they might have even requested it. I can't remember. But I said, I started this blog. If you're interested, I can write some posts and just kind of try to tell you where I'm coming from and some information about trauma. And the funny thing is, I did not end up staying with that group for reasons that probably don't really matter now, but my blog started getting readers and followers, and it was super cool. I started connecting with other people that have been through some similar things and people who are also looking for information, and that is how the blog started. I don't really think I answered the question who I am. But
You didn't, but that's a great... I didn't know all of that.
yeah, as far as
This is great.
how I started writing, I've always been a writer. Some of my earliest elementary school accomplishments were my funny little stories that I'd write and draw little pictures with them. I've always been a writer, always had a journal. That's how I process. So, but as far as writing publicly on the internet, that's when that started. And that's where I came from.
Nice.
And the rest is history.
Cool.
Just kidding.
So, who is Jade?
Well, okay, so as far as who I am specifically, I am one member. I mean, if you've read any of my books, or if you know about my books, Dear Little Ones, Volume 1 and 2, and then I had a couple others. A few are out of print. One of them is still in print, but I pretty much have the same information in the back of every book. Member of poly-fragmented DID system, survivor of ritual abuse, all those things. But if you know anything about DID or multiplicity, I am actually not the original person who was born into the body. And that can be a little strange for people who are not familiar with DID. If you are familiar with it, then that's probably just par for the course. But I am the resident writer. And I took over at a point when the person who used to be in charge was just completely overwhelmed. And I actually didn't know if we'd ever get her back. I didn't know what was going on. It was just sort of a necessity. There was no one else, so I took over the system kind of by accident, but it grew from there. And she is around now. We did find her. She is doing fairly well, but I'm still the writer. And I now have I have relationships with people on the outside, and it's just been something to navigate to try to figure out if she should be back in charge, if I should stay in charge. She does not want to take me away from readers. I don't want to take her away from her life. So that's an interesting discussion that we've been having for about a year now.
And I love you both do.
Yes, I'm sure that's interesting for you.
It's kind of wonderful. But a conundrum as well. So being part of a poly-fragmented system, what is poly-fragmentation? Tell us
Okay,
about that.
so poly-fragmentation is, it's really just a more extreme version of DID. So there is a theory that DID is caused by trauma. Not everyone believes this theory. There are some people out there who don't necessarily think that all fragmentation is caused by trauma. But as far as polyfragmentation goes, and it is worth saying here that a lot of the terms that are used with DID and multiplicity are not necessarily official terms. So you can talk to 4 different people about what polyfragmented means, and you might get 4 different answers. So as far as the DSM-4, or whichever version we're on right now, DSM-5.
Pause for a second. What is the DSM? Because I just learned this the other day. The official. I Googled it. And you guys can all, one thing Jade often says is you can effing Google things yourself. But for our listeners, what is the DSM?
The DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual that psychiatrists and psychologists and a lot of the people in the helping professions are required to refer to, especially when making a diagnosis. It sets forth all the criteria for mental illnesses that are officially and formally considered mental illnesses.
Gotcha.
So as far as polyfragmentation goes, I don't even know that that's a term that's used in the DSM-5.
Okay.
So I think I just want to make the point that there is a set of terms that a lot of people with multiplicity or DID might use, but it is very possible and even likely that each person in each system uses slightly different language, and you may need to ask them what they mean by certain words, because polyfragmented is commonly understood to mean that you have DID, but you're on the more extreme end of the scale. So whereas someone with quote unquote regular DID might have anywhere from 1, 2, 3, 10, 12, 30, 50 alters, people on the polyfragmented end of the scale have 100, 1,000, 3,000, 10,000. I mean, I don't know how you'd even count, but I don't know that there's a number that you have to exceed to be considered polyfragmented. I think I read somewhere on the internet that some people consider if you have over 100, you're considered polyfragmented, but I don't think that there's really an official number. So polyfragmented just means you have DID, but you have way more parts or way more inside people than the common person with DID.
Now you use the term inside people instead of... I mean, people have lots of different terms.
Yes.
Too, right?
I prefer the term inside people, but most systems use their own language and have their own preferred terminology. They used to call inside people alters, but a lot of people don't like that term anymore because it was short for alternate personality, and they're starting to understand more about dissociative identity disorder as it's not a personality disorder. It's not classified as a personality disorder anymore. I think it used to be, but they're understanding now that it's a dissociative disorder, and those are a separate class of disorders. They're not personality disorder, whereas borderline personality disorder is considered a true personality disorder. So all of that is just a bunch of mumbo jumbo, but alternate personality, I mean, it is considered offensive in some circles. So gotcha. I don't use that. I don't prefer that. But every system is going to have its own language that they prefer. So I tend to say inside people or parts or members.
I like that. Now, what is it to be a part of your specific system?
Well, I also think it's worth saying that I can talk about my system, but I don't in any way in any of our podcasts, neither now nor ever, want to be seen as a representative of everyone with DID.
That makes sense.
I can tell you what it's like for me, but I do want the readers who are readers. I'm so used to talking as a writer. I do want the listeners to understand that just because I have an experience and it's this certain way, that is not representative of anyone else, because people with DID are all very, very different. So for me, being part of a polyfragmented system, I'm not really sure even how to classify it, because that's just always been my reality. Mm-hmm. So having other headmates, which is another term that some people use, has always been part of my experience. So much so that I actually didn't know that was uncommon. Like, I grew up as a kid thinking, oh, everyone has this experience. I don't know that I was self-aware enough to even have that thought about it, but you just think whatever you grow up with is normal. So I've always had chatter in my mind, which is, other inside people talking back and forth or fighting or whatever it is that they do. It can be very loud, especially early on in the process when I did not have the level of cooperation and communication that my system has now. If you can imagine being in a room with 10 people who all want to be heard, who all might have a different idea or a different goal that they want to achieve that day, and they're all trying to figure out who's going to get to do what, or even just whose opinion is going to be heard right now. And then if you multiply that by 10 or 100. And now, granted, my system is set up, it's organized in a way that I'm not necessarily going to be in one room with 1,000 other people, but you get the idea.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, it makes sense to me because I know you.
Yes.
And you've explained to me that other people have the experience of their inside people kind of fading in and out of blackness, or well, I'm not going to get into my mind yet, but and what I experienced, but equally hate ourselves. That's nice. So
Complimentary self-hatred.
Yes. So we're sitting here we pause for a second, and then we hear our voices, and both discussing just how much we hate hearing our voices.
It's awkward.
It's
Our voice sounds different in our ear to us than it does when it's recorded and played back to us. It's just weird.
we talk sometimes about our complementary wounds or complementary vulnerabilities, but we have complementary self-hatred too. That's nice. It's very nice to share.
That's so sweet.
So sweet. So, okay. So what causes fragmentation?
Okay, so there is one theory, and again, not everyone agrees with this theory, but by and large, the theory in the mental health community is that trauma will cause fragmentation, especially trauma before the age of 7 or 8. And as far as trauma goes, even the severity of the trauma has a lot to do with whether a person will dissociate. And there are so many factors. I mean, different people deal with trauma in different ways, and not everyone dissociates. There are people out there who go through horrific things. They remember every detail. They're present for all of it. I mean, in some ways, I think that would almost be worse than having the ability to dissociate from it. But there is the theory that if it's bad enough, the person's mind has the ability to cause a sort of separation from them and what's going on. And that, in a nutshell, is fragmentation. Poly-fragmentation tends to mean that there was so much severe trauma at such a young age, and a lot of times even continuing throughout a number of years, that the person had to dissociate and separate parts of their consciousness so often that it created that many people, or that many inside people on the inside of them, just to cope, just to be able to survive and deal with life.
So in learning about all this over the last year or so, that I've just been exploring it, would it be safe to say it's almost like on its very simplest form, it's almost like when it first happens, it's kind of like a pinch hitter coming in, like to take the pain, or to take.
Yeah, it can be.
Yeah.
And also, I know just between me and you reading, we read books to each other a lot when we're traveling or whatever. Just reading The Myth of Sanity recently by Martha Stout,
Good book.
which is a great book. She gives a very balanced view on dissociation and fragmentation and just how common it is. And she gives a more common perspective on how it can happen in a person that seems pretty normal otherwise. And she also speaks very respectfully of survivors. So just putting that out there if you want to give the book a shot.
Well, I'll put that in the links.
Okay. You do that.
I will do that. That is my job as the marketing guy.
But at any rate, we've been reading this book a little bit, and I think she makes a really important point that a lot of times trauma is not necessarily the actual thing that's happening, but what meaning you make of it. So if something is going on and you perceive that your life is in danger, that's traumatic. Whether it's actually in danger or not doesn't matter. If
It's the meaning behind it.
if you're a little child and you don't understand all the factors that are playing into the situation and you believe that you're about to die, that's traumatic. So it doesn't matter if your mom or your dad is there and they logically know that you're not in any real danger. It doesn't matter. So it has a lot to do with what it means to you. So there is a whole other camp, on the other hand, who believe in a thing that is commonly called universal multiplicity. And and I would tend to swing toward this view, although I by no means have anything figured out. But they believe that people come into the world as babies as just a bunch of sort of ego states, and that the job of the parent or the caregiver is to provide a safe and loving relationship where those ego states can kind of come together in some sort of cohesion. So they also tend to believe that the idea that each person has one single personality is just a social construct. So that we're raised to believe that every person just has one singular unified personality. So that's how we see people. And when we're interpreting a person's behavior, we just don't notice the gaps or the differences that someone who's a multiple would consider a change in alter or a change in inside people. So we would view them as mood swings in a person that has one personality, whereas a multiple would tend to see that as another person coming in and one person going out.
See, that acknowledgement has been revelatory for me, because because most of us do. We think, oh, this person is Billy Bob, or this person's Sally. You know, this is who she is, and she's always that way. But the fact is, when we get to know that person, we see so many different sides of them.
Well, I know a lot of times when I try to explain multiplicity or DID to someone, I'll ask them to imagine someone that they only know in one situation, like their boss at work. If they have a boss at work and it's a lady and she's always got her hair in a bun and she's really meticulous about details and she's very strict with you, or she's, whatever she is, then try to imagine that person. If you run into her in a bar on a Friday night with her hair down in a sparkly dress, dancing with a drink in her hand, that's going to be a very jarring difference to you. So That's a different side of that person, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's that person has DID, but you can understand that this person, even though you only know her in one situation, one way, she's a complex person, and there are other sides to her that you don't see if you only ever see her in the office being a certain way. So you have me on the poly-fragmented end, and I'm fairly sure that I have a pretty good grasp on where all of that probably came from. But then you have Robert on the other end of the scale with more of a, I wouldn't necessarily say like a common amount of fragmentation, but just a more mild form, I suppose. And when did you start realizing that you had some fragmentation going on?
Well, last year I was going through a fair amount of traumatic events and life changes. And I was in therapy, and we started doing what people call inner child work. And I think personally, like my personal opinion is that inner child work is the start of recognizing our fragmentation a bit, wouldn't you say? Like that can be like a gateway to starting to recognize that there's pieces of you that can break off a bit.
I have no experience with that.
Okay. All right. Well, for me, the inner child work I did, I'm probably going to keep this a little vague because I don't want to share all my stuff. But basically, this particular therapist guided me through kind of helping me find safe places within my heart and my mind, and helped me go into my mind through meditation to find my wounded self. And that was good. I started learning to love that part of me, in particular, that was my 8-year-old self, and but as time went on, and I saw this whole realm of what used to be intense triggers at the time. I can't even remember what they were, because I just started loving that part of me, and taking care of it and talking to it and whatever. And I saw little triggers getting healed, but then all of a sudden new triggers would come up that were immensely intense. And I was like, well, what the heck, and I'd go to that part of myself and be like, what's going on? And he'd be like, I don't know, and I learned, they're like, and you and a couple other places were like, well, why don't you ask yourself, is there someone there? Is there, and I would find hidden parts of me that, sometimes it feels funny to talk about, that were split off, that I could have full conversations with. And sometimes when you recognize that, I feel like people can feel awkward talking about it because of how not normalized all this is in the mainstream. But I found multiple pieces of me that I don't think I totally dissociate. Would you say I dissociate? I know sometimes she'll be having a conversation with me and I'll be like, she'll be like, you remember when I told you about this? And I'm like, nope, not at all. She's like, oh, I guess I told that to somebody else. You know, and at first I found that a little offensive, and I'm like, no, I didn't. I'm paying attention. I swear, you know. And she's like, no, it's okay. I was just talking to another part of you. And
It took me a while to pick up on the fact that that was probably a different part of you because you don't have as much variation in between different parts. So it was just kind of something to go, okay, well, that wasn't you then. Carry on.
Right.
Or I'll tell you again. Here you go.
But the more I've gotten comfortable with it, the more I've found there's a few main parts of me that kind of shift in and out. And yeah, it's more seamless, you know. And but sometimes we're all together, and like right now I'd say I'm pretty cohesive at the moment. But sometimes when you hear me being super playful, you know, that's a very young part of me talking, or sometimes I'm uber sensitive and gentle. Yeah, I don't know. But recognizing that has actually been really healthy for me because I've been able to love and deal with my inner self a whole lot better, and to address core wounds that need to be addressed because these different parts of me experience those things. So to kind of wrap up what I was saying about me, Jade's been super helpful with kind of pointing out sometimes when I've dissociated without knowing that or shifted between something, and she's a handy resource sometimes. So how did we meet, Jade?
I thought you were going to talk about that.
I bet you just gave that nice answer as we were discussing.
Okay, sure. I'll talk about that.
I got all bashful.
Okay, so Robert and I knew each other. We've known each other for about 11 years. And years ago when we first met, we were just friends. And we would hang out together a lot. Well, I don't know. It wasn't a lot.
I remember a fair few hangout times.
Okay. So we would hang out a fair few
A
times.
fair few times.
And we both enjoyed that, but there was no romantic interest there at the time. And just different life circumstances. Different life circumstances just took us out of each other's lives for several years, and then recently brought us back together. And now there is romantic interest, and now we are together.
It's a great thing.
It is.
It is.
It's a great thing.
It's not always an easy thing, but it's a good thing.
It is.
It's nice. And that's probably something we're going to talk about on future episodes is these kind of relationships and codependency and attachment issues.
And I think it's probably important to say here that we've both done a fair bit of inner work, because there are plenty of people who come together who either are outright multiples and know that and identify as that, or they have fragmentation going on and they may not be consciously aware of it, and they have a lot of problems. And I mean, relationships are hard work regardless of how good the relationship is. And I mean, it's just like anything else. Doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. It's just, if it's worth having, you're going to have to do some work. So I think part of the reason that we get on so well now is because we've both done the work and we're still doing the work. Robert has been doing his own inner work, and I've been doing inner work for over a decade now, which feels endless. And
Can I say something about that?
sure.
Like, one thing I think a huge turning point for me is if your inside people hate one another, it's probably going to be a problem with your outside relationships.
That is true. And a really good point.
Right. The part of me that is speaking right now was often the most hated part of me, the very sensitive part, because I feel the emotions and the stress and the anxiety, and I would bring stomach aches, and I actually don't do it so much anymore because the rest of me decided, oh, if we fight each other, I mean, just like in a relationship, if you're always antagonistic, you feel hated, but yeah, doing that inner work on a daily basis, because it does come up daily, you know, every day there's just a little something, you know, sometimes a lot of something, you know, but it's really worth it to keep doing that inner work.
And what I would say, just to elaborate a little bit more on what you said there, is that if your inside people hate each other, you're going to look to someone outside you to give you what you need. So if your inside people have triggers and don't like each other, they're going to want love and acceptance from someone.
Right.
But you're always going to be seeking that from someone outside of yourself, and that's too much to ask for another person. And it doesn't mean that you are too much. It just means that whether you're multiple or just a person with more low levels of fragmentation, you still have to give yourself the love and acceptance that you need on the inside in order to be able to have that with someone else on the outside without it becoming codependency and dysfunction.
And that would bring us to attachment issues,
Yes,
which we
it
should
would.
probably talk about on another podcast, since we're going on half an hour here. So you people have listened to us ramble for
Bless
half an
you.
hour. Bless you. We hope you've enjoyed it. We'd love to hear your feedback, and if you did enjoy it. If you think we're boring as sin, you can always press the stop button and go away. No, that wasn't nice. So as I was saying before, the little recordy box stopped being a recordy box.
It became decorative there.
Yeah, I'm actually a sound engineer. I know the technical terms for all this shit.
He knows how to do the things.
I had to cuss once because after we said we would cuss, we didn't cuss.
We didn't.
No, we didn't.
I'm always fucking ready to cuss. Anyways, if you have questions, if you would like us to discuss specific topics, we do have sort of a mind map laid out of what we are planning on discussing, but if you have suggestions, we would be happy to hear them and entertain them.
Right.
If you want to hear more Robert and less Jade.
Oh gosh. Or if you want to hear more Jade and less Robert, and you know, in which case we might have to recruit somebody else to interview her. But yeah.
No, I don't want to.
No. but yeah, I mean, the reason we're doing this is to get to know you all so you can get to know us and we can discuss these. And honestly, in the end, we'd like to normalize a lot of this stuff so that it's not a big scary thing made in horror movies, but actually a really healthy perspective on mental health and heart health and
Trauma.
emotional health, dietary health.
No.
No, not dietary health.
No.
No. Okay.
Just no.
Just no. Because trauma.
So, next podcast, unless someone writes us with a humongous request or a genius suggestion, we were going to discuss
Attachment. Well, we had in mind discussing the whole spectrum of DID and fragmentation, and beyond that, attachment theory.
yes, that.
So,
What he said.
so there you go, people. We hope you enjoyed it, and we will talk to you again next time.
Hug your little ones.
Hug your little ones. That's good. That's good.
Okay, bye.
Bye. And lastly, please check out our YouTube channel. If you're not listening to this on our YouTube channel, please subscribe and share with your friends and your littles.